Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and my guests today are, or is, we'll see it a few minutes later, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Well, hello there, Sasha. Glad to be here as always. We'll see if there's more to join the crowd today.
Okay, excellent. Good idea. So I would like to start this with incredible news. It's actually, I would call it ultimatum from Trump to his friend Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Hello, hello. So essentially, Trump said, at least in my interpretation, that he's doing him a great favor of allowing him to end the war in Ukraine because his economy is in shambles and actually it is getting whacked and it's being taken apart and there will be nothing much left. Even today, there is nothing much to talk about.
And President Trump says we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
And you know that given Trump's history and given his preference for doing the unexpected, whereas Vladimir Putin might have expected that he was going to get an easy deal from President Trump and get much of what he wanted, he's finding out that is not the case. And now that because Trump may be perceived by some as being very transactional, but he also knows when he is in a position of power and superior strength. And he is in given what President Trump went through on his road to being reelected, given all the absolute garbage that was thrown at him, including 2 failed assassination attempts, he is in no frame of mind whatsoever to be accommodating or appeasing Vladimir Putin, especially when Vladimir Putin starts making threats to use his nuclear arsenal, and in trying to intimidate President Trump. That is not going to work, and if anything, it's going to result in an even worse situation for Russia in the coming months. So right now, President Trump is taking advantage of the greatly increased aid, military assistance that was approved, that the previous Biden administration approved for Ukraine. He can play off of that. He can get all that aid over there, and he can threaten to increase Ukraine's military assistance and increase the pressure even more. Use economic sanctions, use all of the elements of power against Russia in order to force them to, okay, it's time to call it quits. Time to cut your losses and withdraw, declare victory and go home, call it whatever you want, but you're not getting what you want. This world is not Burger King. You don't get it your way.
All you have is a choice between easy way and the hard way. It's all what is left to you, Mr. Putin, to choose.
So and Ukraine is in now a much better position because now with the aid that they have, and they're increasingly with the increased ability to strike at Russia's weak points, there is the possibility that Ukraine may be able to seal the deal, operationally speaking, militarily speaking, with a decisive counteroffensive at a selected vital point. They have their choice. They can expand. They could expand their salient in the Kursk region, because they seem to be continuing to be very successful there. They could launch a counteroffensive in a selected area against occupied areas in eastern Ukraine. They could theoretically do that if they had local superiority, or they could do, as I have been contending quite some time on this program, that the decisive point will be sealing off the Crimea from Russian reinforcements and supply. And if they can do that, they can then employ newly activated reserve brigades and use them as on a counteroffensive into the Crimea, which would then force the surrender of the whatever remaining Russian occupation forces there are. And that would be an unmistakable and impossible to ignore military defeat for Russia.
I see, Jonathan, there is something what is being called the fog of war. And in that fog, what we don't understand is a strength and or weakness of Ukrainian army. We just don't understand. We know that there is enormous amount of weapons and ammunition came to Ukraine in the last months and a half, 2 months, or whatever. Is admittedly all agree that Ukraine doesn't need any more weapons for at least next 6 months. So you can only imagine how much new ammunition and weapons Ukraine got. Then there is a conflicting information about the manpower of Ukrainian army. Some people believe that Ukraine is lacking forces. On the other hand, they admit that Ukraine has a 1 million strong army as we speak. So there is no need to do any further mobilization, regardless it's a cutoff age 18 years or 25 or in between or so on. There is a 1 million army and there is enough of weapons and ammunition. So what, in your opinion, is the truth?
The truth is that my estimate of the truth is that the power of the Russian strategic offensive against Ukraine is steadily decreasing in its force and effectiveness. Their casualties continue to remain high, even especially among their North Korean allies.
4,000.
Yeah. And so it is also undeniable that the strength of the Russian artillery, the amount of fire that they are able to deliver, that has been steadily and visibly decreasing. They no longer have that big of an advantage. And the Ukrainians, for their part, they recently unleashed an offensive using nothing but robot drones. It's robots against humans. This is like something out of the movie Terminator back in 1984, where you saw all robots trying to exterminate humanity. But in this case, the Ukrainians have managed to develop drones, both mobile drones as well as flying drones, to conduct limited offensives against Russian troops.
They could even build giant meat grinders that would move.
It's absolutely mind-boggling what the Ukrainians have been able to do with the aid that they have been given, and combining that with their own ingenuity and developing their own military infrastructure and production capability. So all of this, and given the fact that essentially Ukraine has been on the strategic defensive, they have nevertheless been able to utilize that form of warfare to exact enormous casualties on both Russian military and the Navy in the Black Sea, and just across all theaters. And it is clear that Russia cannot sustain this type of an offensive for much longer. In fact, some estimates have said that the Russians are going to effectively run out of money to be able to fund this thing before the end of 2025. They don't have that much in the way of monetary reserves left. And so they can't simply print their own money. That just leads to collapse. So,
well, it will lead to incredible inflation, and the ruble will go down to 200 rubles per dollar, if not 250. So this is the population.
Well, the exchange rate from the ruble to the dollar had been a lot worse. Way back in 1998, it had gone as high as 5,000 rubles to the dollar.
Yes.
And so so in any case, Russia is nowhere near as strong as they pretend to be. And they are on the verge of simply just running out of gas. They may be able to continue an offensive of sorts at a very low level, but the Ukrainians are simply building up their forces and getting stronger. And in my opinion, will soon be in a position where they can, if Russia refuses to come to the table, they will then inflict a decisive counteroffensive in an area of their choosing. Again, my predicted choice is in the Crimea, would be the most decisive and beneficial for Ukraine and the most visibly deflating for Russia. So right now, time is effectively on Ukraine's side, not Russia's side. And the West is becoming increasingly united in the face of Russia's failed offensive. And they are not even winning the public relations war. They have been brandishing their nuclear arsenal repeatedly in an effort to try and intimidate the West with fear of escalation. And yet the West has effectively called Russia's bluff. And so now what does Russia do? They do not have effective. I was going to say trump cards, but you notice how people have avoided using the phrases "trumped up charges" and trump cards and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, good reason, but those terms have become obsolete, and it's going to be very interesting to see how Russia tries to brazen this out, try to pretend that we have to negotiate on Putin's terms, and and the unconditional surrender is what the West must put in place, and that's simply not going to happen. And right now, President Trump and his staff are playing it very well. They are simply refusing to give Russia what they want. And right now, it's going to be a very interesting next few months, because the new Trump administration has been moving with, you have to admit, has been moving very energetically, much more energetically than several past administrations, in order to put in place the changes that they want. So it's a very fascinating development. And,
yes. I would like to mention something very interesting. That the latest from Kremlin came the accusation of the West that the war is continued only because in 2008 there was a declaration that Ukraine and Georgia would eventually become NATO members. Although on the same 2008 conference in Bucharest, they were refused to accept both Ukraine and Georgia to be members of NATO. So now they evoked in 2025 the Bucharest conference of 2008 as the reason why Russia continues the war in Ukraine. This is insane, because West already lately said so many times that Ukraine will not join NATO, at least not in the near future, not in the next 10 years or whatever. So this is insanity, 100% of what Russians are making as a talking point, as a reason why they continue the war, losing themselves already 1 million plus people in 3 years or less than 3 years. The Bucharest conference of 2008. What do you think?
It just reveals the level of desperation.
Yeah.
That's all it reveals, really. They are grasping at straws. They are looking for any possible excuse, anything that they can extract out of this conflict in order to save face. And the West should realize by now collectively that any agreement, an armistice or anything type of agreement that rewards Russia in any visible or tangible way for its aggression against Ukraine, that is appeasement. That is not a genuine peace agreement. We should not appease Russia in any way or reward them any way. So that is what should happen. And right now, it is becoming a most unexpected development. There were some commentators who were believing that that Trump was going to, sell Ukraine down the river and sacrifice Ukraine's sovereignty for the sake of making a deal. That's not the case. It simply is not going to happen. So now it becomes in this flurry of activity that the new Trump administration is conducting. It is going to be fascinating to see how all of these efforts come together in ending the war in Ukraine. Trump administration has already tacitly conceded that, okay, we're not going to end this in 1 day. Obviously, that's already passed, but 100 days would be even a stretch achievement, in my opinion, because Russia has already stated the leadership at least is stating unconditional surrender. Well, that's not coming. So Russia must be compelled. That is how what it comes to. They must be compelled to accept a peace.
There's something else interesting going. Speaking of European countries, they are unsatisfied, at least major European countries, with the NATO itself, because it includes Hungary with this Viktor Orban and Fico from Slovakia. So they are becoming a little bit discouraged with the situation, that even if they would do something or would want to do something, regardless Ukraine or anything else, they may find it impossible to do that because they need agreement of all NATO members. So right now there is also unsatisfaction that all the situation of reaching peace in Ukraine is almost a two-man deal between Trump and Putin, and European countries that also helped Ukraine a lot and still continue to do so and increase their budgets and so on. So somehow they are being away from negotiating the settlement, and probably practically I think it's reasonable, because it's easier between two people to achieve something, or at least achieving, if not the peace agreement, but at least the understanding what it involves and what has to be done in next months, 3 months, 6 months, or whatever time it might take, and then bring other countries, especially Ukraine, will be brought in at some point anyway. So I think that's not a major consideration to me. What major is that European countries, the leading suppliers of help to Ukraine, namely UK, France, Germany, they're thinking about creating a new structure, which includes this country which genuine in their helping to Ukraine. That will definitely include Poland and Baltic states. But guess what? The country number one in this alliance will be Ukraine itself. You know why? Because the security of Western Europe depends on Ukraine a great deal. Because of all the countries, only Ukraine has a real, absolutely intangible experience of fighting Russian army for now almost years.
Perfectly obvious. Ukraine effectively, that what they are doing is that effectively making Ukraine the eastern bulwark of the NATO alliance. De facto, if not actual making Ukraine an actual member of the NATO alliance, they can in effect do the next best thing with this series of bilateral agreements, reinforcing Ukraine's military strength, and hopefully in the aftermath, I am hoping that in the aftermath of an armistice, ceasefire, or at least some sort of temporary cessation of hostilities, that those who had fled Ukraine at the start of the war will now be encouraged to move back and help rebuild Ukraine. And if the other members of NATO and the European Union, for example, can reinforce and encourage Ukrainian repatriation, basically have these people return to Ukraine and help rebuild the country, And
I'm expecting that once the war will be over and rebuilding of Ukraine will start, a lot of Russians will move from Russia to Ukraine.
oh no, that would because Ukraine will be looking mighty good compared to Russia,
Oh, yes.
economically speaking as well as demographically speaking. So there is that. So that could be
Climate is better than in Russia, and the women are nicer than in Russia. So there are a lot of reasons for.
yeah, there are a lot. There are a lot of there. Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of very good, very attractive features for rebuilding Ukraine and repatriating, and that some have been saying that Ukraine is going to experience a demographic crisis because of its casualties. Well, not nearly as bad. That demographic crisis is not going to be nearly as bad as the one developing in Russia.
Oh yeah.
That they are going to be feeling the effects for the remainder of the 21st century.
And this is the reason why Putin cannot stop the war. Because people will ask him, Vladimir Vladimirovich, so in 3 years you lost 1 million lives. The economy is completely destroyed. What did we get for 3 years from you? What have we got with your country, with your people? How to answer these questions?
You won't be able to answer it effectively.
No.
So
He must continue the war then.
But so in any case, he's in too deep to quit. But it is the responsibility of the United States, in cooperation with its NATO allies, to compel him to quit. And sadly enough, the only way to do that is to inflict upon him a visible operational defeat.
I remember, Jonathan, in the first few months of war, there were calls to Putin from Macron and from Scholz and from others. They were trying to find a solution how to save Putin's face. No longer that is today.
No, his ego and his reputation are no longer worthy considerations.
And Trump didn't give him a lot of help how to save his face. Mm-mm. There's absolutely no hard way or easy way. Maybe easy way is the way to save his face. I don't know.
So in any case, the ongoing situation is I must admit fascinating, and it is going to be now that all eyes really should be on the Trump administration in the next few months to see what other measures will be taken. They are moving with astonishing speed. And so we'll see how long and how effectively this momentum can be kept up.
Absolutely. And so far, Zelensky is playing his cards very smartly. When Trump became a little bit more vocal than before and directly confronted Putin, and not a telephone call. No, he did it publicly through his through social site. So it's a public humiliation for Mr. Putin, and they even don't know how to answer. So one answer is they revoke now this 2008 Bucharest NATO meeting, which is laughable, and this is incredible stupidity. Even all of a sudden now, when 1 million people were lost, invoke this Bucharest meeting. So what you've done because of that? You killed your own 1 million people because of that meeting in Bucharest in 2008. This is utmost stupidity that I've ever seen at all. And other than that,
astonishing. Well, you remember what Napoleon once said: "Never interfere with an opponent who is in the process of destroying himself."
Absolutely,
and that's what the Trump administration is doing. And so it is just the Trump administration they know that they hold the high cards. They know that they have the superior position, and so they should not surrender that, and they should continue to reinforce Ukraine with as much aid
it's underway pretty well.
Oh yeah. And just go ahead and keep reinforcing it, because the Russians are clearly running. The Russian strategic offensive is clearly running out of steam, And so,
And there's something else very significant aftermath of this Trump's message to Putin is that Putin's plan was at some point, sooner or later, to get one-on-one with Trump and tell him all the stories about Pechenegi and Rurik and all the other stuff about what 1,000 years ago happened and how Russia grew, why it's a great nation and why it's a great country and all this stuff, and get some kind of understanding with Trump. No longer the case after this message to Putin, very direct,
yep.
and nothing is hidden there. So Putin cannot now say, "Oh, Trump, Mr. Trump, I wanted to tell you about Rurik and Pechenegi." Who needs that?
And President says, forget it, Vladimir. No deal, no deal.
Yeah. Okay, now we are into a real confrontation. It is diplomatic, but nevertheless, it's a confrontation. Russians now must react. They have to come up with something which I even don't understand what it is. Because if you remember a few weeks ago, after Trump already won the presidency, and there were some messages, I think coming from Patrushev, implying that there were some promises that Trump made, and now it's come time to deliver. And they said that they have to now watch for Trump's security very carefully, or so on. So it was very sort of kind of in a way intimidating, in a way naive, some kind of a try to extract from Trump something which they thought they have a cards to play with. Well, here is here is an ultimatum, very direct and very up to the point, and all those previous Patrushev's threats, it's now making absolutely nonsense. It's kind of shows that they're on different levels. Here is a Trump, here is Putin and Patrushev and others, and just incredible.
It simply comes across as empty posturing.
Mark tells that Trump just had interview on Fox where he blamed Zelensky. I'm not familiar with this interview, but why would you blame Zelensky for anything? No.
According to the article, that suppose that Trump blamed Zelensky for not preemptively surrendering to Russia before they invaded, which again, Zelensky and the Ukrainian they had no real reason to preemptively surrender. There was no innovation to do so, and it ignores the history of Russia-Ukrainian relationships, because Ukraine was in no particular frame of mind to preemptively surrender to Russia on anything. So it's and of course now Trump and his advisors are continually evaluating the situation, and it will be interesting to see that when they realize that there is no easy compromise to be had with Russia on this issue.
But Jonathan, this theory what that Zelensky should have surrendered to Russia, then any somewhat bigger country, when they are making some threats against smaller and weaker country, so the weaker country has to surrender immediately just because of the threats. Okay, it may be a wisdom is that this way you can avoid wars, but then all smaller countries, they might surrender all at once to all bigger countries.
It sets a very unpleasant precedent. For future confrontations and relationships. So it remains to be seen how this will develop over the next several months. But to borrow an old Soviet phrase, the correlation of forces is steadily moving in favor of Ukraine, not Russia.
So in fact, Jonathan, I think it's Putin has to rush and say, Donald, please help us to finish this bloody war. Because as Ukraine is getting stronger, Russia is getting weaker at the same time. So that should really bring the end of war if Putin is acting logically and in good faith. But we don't know what's inside of the brain of Mr. Putin. And well, we'll see. I think next month will be very interesting to see, because Russia cannot see on this ultimatum without saying anything at all. So they probably brought their biggest and greatest minds, including probably their uh, so-called propaganda people like Simonyan and Solovyov and others. Please help us. So we have to say something. So what it is that we have to say? Tell us, please. And it will be very interesting what will come out of it. Yeah, Jonathan, sorry, you wanted to add something.
No, I have nothing to add to that. It's just a fascinating turning point right now, and basically all that Ukraine has to do is keep, you know, strengthening their position as best they can and looking for, if there's any move on Ukraine's part that remains within their purview, if they want to. The Russians apparently, according to some reports, are trying to gain as much territory wherever they can in order to have a stronger bargaining position. And it now remains for Ukraine to, at a time of its choosing, to inflict a decisive counteroffensive that will also affect subsequent negotiations for a ceasefire or armistice in its favor. So now, the next month or two, especially as the weather clears, as we move into the spring, that could be a very propitious time for a Ukrainian counteroffensive.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you so much for today's program. Have a great weekend, and we'll
Yes,
see
you do the same.
Thursday. Thank you. Same place, same time,
Yeah.
and glory to Ukraine.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye bye, everybody.